Hello, MCU fans. Today we're going to take a look at a major timeline clue that, I'll be honest, at least I missed in Quantumania, but I have to wonder if everybody missed it because I'm not seeing other YouTube channels talking about this. And even if I did see it when I watched Quantumania, I definitely had not processed how this major timeline clue impacts the bombshell we learned at the end of Loki Season 2, which was the creation of the tree for the 616 universe and all its branches. So I think you're going to find this really, really interesting. Let's dive right in and see what we can find out. And don't forget, we have the March contest running all month long. Be a subscriber, leave a comment. You could win a book or a steel book. Best of luck. And of course, we have the membership option in case you want to help me with my goal of doing this full time one day. You get cool perks like custom emojis and behind the scenes videos. But honestly, no matter how you support the channel, it's all greatly appreciated. Leaving comments, liking videos, subscribing, it all goes a long way. So thank you so much. All right, so to talk about this new timeline bombshell, I need to discuss the season by season timeline that Marvel recently released about a month ago. That hopefully is going to show up on Disney Plus. It's not out there yet. They promised it would be, but even if it doesn't show up for a while, I'm so glad they showed us where each season of each show fits in the overall timeline. Now, one interesting thing I have to mention, because I got tons of comments on this on the last video, No Way Home is not in this timeline. I'm guessing because Disney Plus doesn't have the rights to air it in all regions. I think a few regions have No Way Home, but most do not. So my guess is it will appear between Eternals and Multiverse of Madness when it finally shows up. But anyway, that's why it's not here for now. But the big reveal was that Loki Season 2 and What If Season 2 actually at least end after the Marvels. That is crazy. Because we know that Loki Season 2 begins right after Season 1. But it ends after the Marvels? Wow. Now, I guess we could have guessed that at least the very, very end of Loki Season 2 is after Quantumania. Well, we know that, right? Because in the post-mortem or almost post-credit scene, we hear them talking about one of the Kangs causing a little bit of ruckus on a 616 adjacent realm, which of course is referring to the Kang in Quantumania. So sure, this little snippet was definitely after Quantumania, but what about the tree? That's the question of the hour. When in the timeline did Loki form his tree? I mean, sure, we know that it was formed by the time of What If Season 2 because, like, the Watcher's totally looking at it. But when in the overall timeline did Loki create the tree? That's really the question. Because we know that Loki Season 2 picks up right after Season 1, right? I mean, Loki sees the statue of Kang and Mobius is chasing him. I don't know who you are. And then Loki jumps off the ledge and boom, the craziness ensues of Loki Season 2. So if it starts right after Season 1, how long during the course of the MCU does it run before Loki finally creates that tree? Well, we learned something really big in the timeline book. So the timeline book seems to imply that at least Loki Season 1, because Season 2 is not in the timeline book yet, but anyway, Season 1 runs parallel to other events in the MCU. Because notice here we see events in Loki Season 1 happening simultaneously with events in Endgame. And of course, this is after the time heist. This is after the blip. Everybody's come back now. And in fact, we see the little green line there representing the TVA continuing along. And it finally ends because, Loki Season 1 ends, and I presume Season 2 will pick up right at this point. But notice, we still continue to see events running simultaneous to the MCU and leading right up to WandaVision. So what's going on there? I mean, I do think anything at the Citadel at the end of time, where He Who Remains is located, that is outside of time for sure. It has to be. But what about the TVA itself? Does time flow in the TVA? Well, that's the big question, right? In fact, it's a question that Loki himself asked Mobius. He's like, how long have you been here? And Mobius says, I don't know. It's hard to say. Time passes differently here in the TVA. Now, notice he doesn't say time doesn't pass. He just says it passes differently here in the TVA. Interesting. In fact, then in Season 2, when Loki starts time slipping and says that he went into the past, Mobius is like, what? What do you mean, the past? Where? And Loki's like, here, the past TVA. And then Mobius is like, no, there is no past TVA. Time doesn't work here like that. And Loki's like, well, it does, because it's happening to me. So that's interesting. Is it a question of there is no past? Or is it a question of you cannot go to the past? I have to wonder if there is a past in the TVA, and thus there is time flowing, but they just didn't think you could go to the past. You couldn't access the past. I mean, there has to be a past, right? Because we see that Loki time slips, well, into the past. And in the past, OB is saying it's impossible to time slip. And then notice present day Loki is saying, or present day OB is saying, a long time ago, he came to me complaining about time slipping. Well, look at the way he said it. A long time ago. That implies a passage of time. There can't be a long time ago if time does not pass. And here in the past, he works with OB to create a temporal ore extractor. So in the present, we have one temporal ore extractor. So I think that the issue isn't whether time flows. It's a question of whether you can access that past. And they didn't think you could. They thought it's not that it didn't exist, it just was inaccessible. And look at some of these other interesting quotes. Here's Sylvie in season 1 saying, I had to pull a memory from hundreds of years prior before she even fought for them. So this was when she was learning about what the different hunters' pasts were. Well, she says from hundreds of years prior. So that means there was a passage of time. In fact, look at this one. OB literally says that Mobius visited him 400 years ago. How do you know it was 400 years if there isn't some sense of time, right? Here's Ravonna saying eons of friendship, and you threw it all away on a couple of Lokis. Eons implies time. He remains says the same thing, eons ago, before the TVA, implying that there was a before the TVA, and it was eons ago. So there's been a lot of time in the TVA so far, but there has been time. That's the real key. And then I love this one. Limit your lunch break to 17 minutes. I mean, I know it's a joke poster. I get that. But how can you limit your lunch break to 17 minutes if you cannot measure time? You have to be able to measure it to be able to, keep it to 17 minutes. And then I think the biggest evidence that there has to be some sense of time in the TVA is in episode 1. They were using the time twister to loop Loki back in time. Didn't loop the furniture, but it did loop him. Well, how can you loop someone to where they were in the past if there is not a past? And in fact, in this case, the time twister could access that past to send him there. Okay, so I'm just bringing all this up because in my previous video, I had a lot of people saying, dude, there is no passage of time in the TVA. And I'm throwing at this as, exhibit 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, that I do believe there is a flow of time. It's just really, really different. So I think that's why Marvel has said, this is kind of my multiversal timeline I've been working on, why they're saying Loki season 1 happens, and then there is a period of time before Loki season 2 ends with the tree. And during that period of time is when the loom was going nutso, right? And during that period of time, according to the timeline that Marvel released, Quantumania takes place. Quantumania happens before the tree because it finishes well before Loki season 2 ends. Okay, so we could just take Marvel's word for it, but I know if you're like me, you want proof. And that's where this video comes into play. We're going to be able to prove, I believe at least, that Quantumania does indeed happen before Loki forms that tree. And then here's the rest of the timeline that I put together again in those earlier videos. You can check out for more details, but I'm basically showing anytime someone in 616 either pulls people into 616, like the Spider-Man, or when someone leaves 616 to another universe, like with the Illuminati, like with Beast, or in the case of the Kang Council, where they're looking at 616. I think all of these things are happening during the course of Loki Season 2. Okay, so, also, I'll throw out, I think that Deadpool 3 and Fantastic Four are going to happen after Loki Season 2, so after the formation of the tree. I think that's actually going to play really heavily into the plot of Deadpool 3, Deadpool and Wolverine, but we'll just have to see. That's my guess at this point. Okay, so what is this evidence, this bombshell evidence I keep mentioning? Well, Wyatt is the man. Wyatt left this comment on a previous video from a couple days ago, and you could read the whole thing if you want, but I'm going to focus on this part in particular, where Wyatt says, Janet scrolls through what I believe is the sacred timeline and finds their destination, which is Earth, which I believe Janet was trying to find a point in time to time travel to, possibly moments before they were all sucked into the quantum realm. I was blown away when he sent this to me because I'm like, sacred timeline? I don't remember seeing the sacred timeline, at least not for Janet. When was Janet looking at a sacred timeline? Well, let's look and see. Okay, so this is in the movie at the point where MODOK has been killed and Janet is in Kang's headquarters and saying, hey, I think I can give us one shot back. And so what then do they pan to? Her looking at the sacred timeline. And I'm going to be honest, this is probably on screen for 4 seconds. I mean, it flies by if you're not paying attention. But I paused and I got a ton of screen captures to look at here. So she's looking at the sacred timeline, presumably the 616 sacred timeline, and she taps it. And I think what's happening here is she's zooming in, which is why some of the lines start to look more parallel, because once you get closer and closer, well, as we saw, in fact, in Loki season 1, the sacred timeline was formed of multiple timelines. They were all branching off each other, but they looked like straight lines depending on how close you were getting to them. So I think that's what's happening here. But so she keeps zooming in until she finds, I believe, the sacred timeline, the timeline she wants to travel to. And then she opens up the area, says, I want this one, selects it, and now she chooses the location. And that location, of course, is Earth. And so, boom, there's Earth. And then she has to pick the time that she wants to go back to on Earth. And I think that's what the little gibberish is on top of Earth. In fact, I'll zoom in. I wish I could read that. I think it says, but whatever it says, I think that is basically the coordinates for a specific timeline, the sacred timeline, a specific time on that timeline, and a specific location, a la the Earth, and in particular, their lab. So Janet then grabs that and puts it in her hand. Notice it zooms up to her hand, and then she puts that into the multiversal core. She says to everybody, if we want to go home, we got to go home now. She then goes over and continues to configure, and then I think this is where she's convincing the core to open the portal to that location because it looks like the Earth, but then she puts the rings around it, and she grabs it with her hand, picks it up, puts it into this virtual multiversal core, and sure enough, the actual multiversal core activates with those coordinates, turns on, opens a portal in the quantum realm, which of course leads back to the now destroyed lab, so probably just a few moments after they left. Maybe she was actually trying to do it before they even left, but it looks like the results is definitely after, and of course they jump out. Okay, so what does this mean and why do I think this is so important? Well, if we go back to this, skinnied down timeline, I think this is proof that Quantumania happens before Loki forms his tree, because the monitor Janet is looking at is the timeline not formed like a tree, but still like He Who Remains had it. Now notice, it is branching uncontrollably. This is the point after they quit pruning the branches. And so it's branching everywhere, but it's just not so far along that it was just going totally nuts. I think it's later then, during Loki season 2, when the Kang Council is able to see into the sacred timeline and the loom that is pretty much destroyed at this point, and the timelines are going everywhere. So it'll be interesting to see how the timeline book, part 2, breaks this all down. But my guess is Quantumania is happening a little earlier in Loki season 2, and then the Kang Council post-credit scene is a little later in Loki season 2. But that is why I think this is concrete proof that Wyatt found, way to go, buddy, that shows Quantumania is indeed before the tree, and thus that new season-by-season timeline that Marvel gave us is correct. And that's why I think this completely makes sense, how it all ties together. And I just think it's so important that we keep trying to understand what Marvel is trying to tell us, because if not, then we end up getting confused. We end up watching Deadpool 3 and Fantastic Four having no relation to where this all fits. I think Marvel continues to give us clear hints as to where this is going, and we just have to decide what to do with them. So, okay, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you think this is concrete proof that Quantumania happens before Loki's tree was formed? That is the question of the hour. All right, so don't forget, March contest, be a subscriber, leave a comment, win a book or a steelbook. And of course, we have the membership option in case you're interested in that. And as I always like to mention, we have the Discord. So many fun things we're doing on that. We have upcoming watches, as you can see here. We have Comic Club and MMRPG. We have DC Retrospective to get prepared for the new DCU. And then we also have other media forums. I mean, we mainly talk about Star Wars, DC, and Marvel. But as you can see, you pick a topic and we can create it on the forum and people can have fun chatting about it. And then lastly, we all know my thumbnails are not great. So we're doing a contest because I'm going to do an upcoming video on Moon Girl Season 2, Part 2, because it was split into 2 parts. And you can help design the thumbnail for it. If you win, I will announce who it is, give you credit for it, and you'll make my video look a lot better. So I will leave a pinned comment so you can join the Discord. Almost 1,300 people across the globe, 24/7 chatting. So it's a lot of fun. Also, if you don't mind, like this video, subscribe if you haven't already. You can check out more content, and we'll all continue to enjoy the ever-growing, ever-changing Marvel Cinematic Universe.